a funny time, 3:00. Too late for lunch, but a bit early for tea. Besides, there were one or two brave souls who trekked all the way from Wolverhampton. Couldn't risk giving them tea, or we'd have had a mutiny on our hands. And I think people like to be offered something, even if they don't actually eat it. Well, one's first instinct was to make a beeline for the freezer, rout out the inevitable quiche. But I thought, Muriel, old girl, that's the coward's way out. So the upshot was, I stopped up till 2 a.m, trundling out a selection of my old standards. Chicken in a lemon sauce, beef en croûte from the old Colchester days, I thought of Jessie Marchant, and bushels of assorted salads. As it happened, it wasn't exactly a salady day. It's a bit crisp for April, actually. But Mabel warmed up the proceedings with one of her famous soups, conjured up out of thin air, so we lived to fight another day. Nobody could quite put their finger on the flavour, so I was able to go round saying, "Have you guessed the soup yet?" That broke the ice a bit. Don't know what had got into Mabel. Gone quite mad, put a pinch of curry in it. That foxed most people. It was cauliflower, actually. Still, was a bit sticky at the start, as these occasions generally are. There were people there I didn't know from Adam. All the Massey Ferguson people, for instance, completely unknown quantities to me. And then lots of people I knew I should know and didn't. Every time I saw anybody looking lost, I thought of Ralph. Grabbed hold of somebody I did know and breezed up saying, "This is Jocelyn. She's at the Royal College of Art. I don't know your name, but the odds are you're in agricultural machinery." Just left them to it. Case of light the blue touch paper and retire. But it was such a mixed bag. Well, there were several there from the Sports Council, quite a contingent from Tunbridge, some friends of Chichester Cathedral and the Discharged Prisoners' Aid Society, Madge and Perce, whom we'd met on the Mauritania on our honeymoon, and Donald and Joyce Bannerman, who were actually en route from Abu Dhabi. Then Donald bought a paper at Heathrow, saw the announcement, and they came straight down. And one sweet old man who'd come all the way over from Margate. He said, "You won't remember me, Mrs. Carpenter, but I'm a member of the criminal fraternity." I shrieked. As the vicar said, Ralph touched life at many points. Children magnificent, of course. Or Giles, at any rate. Luckily, Margaret didn't appear. But Giles took off all the household brigade people on a tour of the garden, while Pippa coped with some of the bigwigs from the city. "I don't think you know George," I heard one of them say. "George cracks the whip at Goodison Brown." Poor souls. They deserved medals, both of them. And Crispin and Lucy, angelic, rushing in and out, filling up people's glasses. I wanted them to have a rest. "No," said Giles, "let them do it. They adored their grandpa." "Adored him," said Pippa, "like we all did." The church had been absolutely chocker. And I'd managed not to blub until right at the finish, when they struck up with "I vow to thee, my country." And then when we got back, because I'd got 101 things to do, I was perfectly all right, until I saw awful Angela Gillespie had made the mistake of talking to boring old Frank from the firm, and I heard the dreaded words forklift trucks. And I thought how many times I'd had to shut Ralph up on similar occasions. The thought of shutting Ralph up at all set me off instantly. Had to nip into the pantry to staunch the flow. Shortly to be followed by Mabel, who'd just fallen over one of his old Wellingtons and promptly gone into floods. So we had a good laugh and a good cry about that before powdering our noses and hurling ourselves back into the fray. Well, when everybody had gone, I'm just having 5 minutes in the chair before tackling the debris, when Margaret comes plunging into the room. She said, "What were all those people?" I said, "Well, it was a kind of party for Daddy." She said, "Why, is he dead?" I said, "You know he's dead." She said, "Who killed him?" I said, "Don't be such a donkey. Come along, we'll find you a tablet." Some of Ralph's medicine still in the cupboard. Fat lot of good that did, I thought, and poured it down the lav. Then felt a bit choked. Anyway, the tablet did the trick. I heard her walking about at 2 a.m, but I didn't get up. Except then, I had to get up anyway, because it suddenly came to me, in all the excitement, I'd completely forgotten to feed the dogs. Everybody I run into says not to take any big decisions. I staggered into the community centre, bearing Ralph's entire wardrobe, which Angela Gillespie had nipped in smartish and earmarked for muscular dystrophy. 5 minutes later, Brenda Bousfield came knocking on the door on behalf of cystic fibrosis. Knives out straight away, practically had to separate them. In fact, in the end, I did separate them. City suits to Angela and Brenda the tweeds. It was all lovely stuff. Beautiful dinner jacket from Hawes and Curtis. Would have done for Giles if he hadn't got so fat. Mind you, he didn't want the ties either. Angela did. "Lovely jumble," she said. "How are you coping? Don't take any big decisions, one day at a time. I don't see any shoes." Actually, I'd been silly. Kept his shoes back. I loved his shoes. Always used to clean them. My shoeshine lady. Angela said, "Whatever you do, don't give them to Brenda. They're top-heavy with staff, her group. It's well known. It'll all go on admin. We can use shoes." I thought I'd go into the library, see if Miss Dunsmore could find me something on bereavement. That's something I learned from Ralph. Plug into other people's experience. Pool your resources. A new experience is like travelling through unknown country. But remember, others have taken that road before you, old girl, and left notes. So question number 1, is there a map? Question number 2, am I taking advantage of all the information available? Doesn't matter if you're going to get married, commit a burglary, or keep a guinea pig. Efficiency is the proper collation of information. Oh, Ralph. Miss Dunsmore did a reconnoitre round, but the only thing she could come up with was a book about burial customs in Papua New Guinea. Well, I thought even Ralph would draw the line at that. However, she thought the health centre did a pamphlet on bereavement. She said she wasn't offering this as consolation, but apparently elephants go into mourning, and so very strangely does the pike. So we chatted about that for a bit. She said not to take any big decisions, and if I was throwing away any of his books, could I steer them her way as she ran some sort of reading service for the disabled? Well, I dropped into the health centre, and the receptionist said there had been a pamphlet on death. They'd kept it on the counter. Only the tots kept taking them to scribble on, so they hadn't reordered. However, she'd skimmed through it, and the gist of it was not to take any big decisions, and to throw yourself into something. I said, "You don't mean the canal?" She said, "Come again?" Oh, nobody expects you to make jokes. Well, as I was leaving, she called me back. She said, "Did Ralph wear spectacles? Because if he did, not to throw away the old pairs, as owing to the cutbacks, they'd started a spectacles recycling scheme." Back at base, Mabel said that Margaret had been plonked on the chair in the passage all morning, with her bag packed, her outside coat on, and for some reason Wellington boots. Said the police were coming. We manhandled her up the stairs, and after about 17 goes I managed to smuggle in a tablet, which did the trick. She was just settling down for a little ziz, and who should draw up at the door but Giles? He'd cancelled all his appointments, eluded the guards at the office, and just belted down the M3 because he suddenly thought I might need cheering up, bless him. Well, he'd always been able to get round Mabel ever since he was little, so she agrees to hold the fort while he whisks me off to lunch at somewhere rather swish. I thought to myself, I hope you're watching, Ralph, you old rascal, and eating your words. Well, Ralph and Giles never got on for more than 5 minutes. Yes, it's funny. He was always dotty about Mags. Well, when eventually we got back, what with the wine, etc., I mean pudding and cheese, I'm just longing to get my head down, but Giles cracked the whip, got me to sign lots of papers. Turns out, Ralph has left me very nicely off. What with the house and all his various holdings, one way and another, I'm quite a rich lady. He's tied up a bit for Margaret. Nothing specific for Giles, but he doesn't mind because, of course, he doesn't need it, and when I go, he'll get it all anyway. But what I do have is what Giles calls a liquidity problem. And the first item on the agenda is to give me some ready cash, hence all the papers. And then something about buying a forest. Bit wary to start with. Said, can I not mull it? Giles said, well, you can, but the index is going down. So I said, well, what about Mr. Sherlock? Giles said, oh, you know what these lawyers are. Wish Ralph could have seen me signing away. He never showed me any papers at all, whereas Giles took me through it, explained it all. Well, I suppose it's a different generation. What he did do, which made me feel a tiny bit shifty, was to take 3 or 4 of the best pictures, the 2 carriage clocks and 1 or 2 other choice items. It said that when the sharks from the revenue came round, those were just the sort of items to bump up the estate duty. So I said, well, what about the inventory? Giles said, I think we'll just drag our brogues on that one. Apparently everybody does it. He's just going to keep the stuff under the bed at Sloane Street till the heat is off, then back it all comes. Margaret, still lying on the bed when I went upstairs. Asleep. She looks quite presentable. Daddy's little girl. Not so little now, those great legs. But, as Mabel says, it looks as if we're on the hospital trail again. If she goes in, I could perhaps go to Siena. Except I've got nobody to go with. One keeps forgetting that. It's not an ideal place. No one is saying it is. Not even Giles says that. In fact, it's a perfect example of one of those places they're always famously about to scrap. Started life as a workhouse, probably, during the Napoleonic Wars, and qua building, not displeasing. As one weaned on Nicholas Pevsner and practically a founder member of the National Trust, I wouldn't alter a single brick. As an arts centre, first rate. As a museum for industrial archaeology, couldn't be better. As a craft centre, weaving, pottery, a shop window where craftsmen and craftswomen could make and display their wares. Absolutely ideal, the very place. But as a mental hospital, oh, no, 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 no. See, the food, for instance. The food has to cross a courtyard. Kitchen is so far away, for all I know, it may have to cross a frontier. One toilet per floor. I just put my head round the door and wished I hadn't. No telephone that I could see, and the beds so crammed together, if you got out of one, you'd be into another. Dreadful. And, of course, I keep thinking of Ridgway's. The cup of tea, matron's parlour, that immaculate lawn. It would break poor old Ralph's heart. But Ridgway's costs money, always did. First of the month, beg to inform, respectfully submit, all very nice, but £800 on the dot, and more and more. And, as Giles said, mummy no can do. That kind of money we do not have. Well, we do, but it's all tied up. And whereas in normal circumstances one would have fought tooth and nail to keep her in the private sector, just out of respect for Daddy, nowadays we're in what Giles calls a different ball game. Oh, and the old thing minds. Goodness, he minds. I wanted him to come with me today, but just the idea of the place upsets him so much he can't even set foot in it. I must say, I feel the same. What I really wanted to do was sit down and have a good weep. That I thought of Ralph, as if I ever think of anybody else. And I thought, come on, Muriel, old girl, you're a widow lady, got time on your hands. If anyone's in a position to roll up their sleeves, it's you. So, the next time I paid Mags a visit, I went in search of the hospital secretary. Almoner, they used to be called in my day. Bearded him in his den. He did have a beard, actually. And very sorry for himself he looked besides. And I'm not surprised. It turns out he has to precept for absolutely everything, down to the last bar of soap. And should he have any bright ideas for improvements and manages to convince his own committee, he's still utterly at the mercy of the regional spending programme. I ask about a table tennis table. He says my point exactly. A table tennis table would mean going cap in hand to Guildford, which he's not anxious to do since the vegetable steamer's on its last legs. And on the rare occasions when he does have a bit of latitude, he finds his hands are tied by Newpie. So, the upshot is I am writing sheaves of letters to everybody I've ever heard of in an attempt to plug the hospital into the coffee morning circuit, get a support group started. What I'm saying is that mental illness is a scourge, and it's also a mystery. Can occur in the best regulated families, no one knows why. I mean, take us. Why were we singled out? Loving parents, perfectly normal childhood. And then this. I went over this afternoon. Margaret was weaving a basket. Not making a bad stab at it, really, all things considered. I was lucky I arrived when I did, because she'd just got to the part where she had to integrate the handle with the main body. She's making a real pig's breakfast of it. So I got cracking, showed her the whys and wherefores. Actually ended up making both handles. Seemed to make her a lot happier. She's never very good with her hands. Giles was a real wizard. Apropos Giles, there's been a bit of a crisis over the funds, apparently. Nothing serious. Chums let him down, didn't read the small print. He says there's nothing to worry about, but we may have to pull our horns in a bit further. I said, well, all hands to the pumps. With all Daddy's contacts in the city, why don't I start a little catering business? Executive lunches and the like. Good nursery food and lashings of it. Giles, not sure, thought these days they wanted something a bit more nouvelle. I laughed. I said, don't you believe it? Men are overgrown schoolboys, always were. Preached salad at Ralph for years. What good did it do? Giles said, small detail, Mum. What are you going to use for capital? So that put the tin hat on that one. It's this bloody liquidity thing. It's funny. Never heard Ralph mention it. Job sorting out the one or two things I want to keep. I won't be sorry to see the back of most of it, quite honestly. I feel it puts me more in the same sort of boat as Ralph. Lay not up for yourself treasures on earth type thing. Lilies of the field syndrome. I said this to the vicar who was looking around. He thought this was a healthy attitude. And how much did I think the walnut side table would fetch? It would go so well in their hall. The huge marquee on the lawn. People trooping through the house, and Angela Gillespie never away, said how horrid it must be to have people poking about amongst one's prized possessions. I said, yes, but not really. The person I do feel sorry for is Mabel, who's had it to polish all these years. Still, she was getting on like a house on fire with the auctioneer's men, who were all so careful and polite I'd have married any one of them on the spot. Angela beefing on about all the dealers being here, putting up the prices. I thought, good job. Still, however much it all fetches, it'll only be a drop in the ocean. At one point, Angela got the Duttons in a corner and started telling the tale. Said Giles had always been a wrong un. I turned round. I said she didn't know what she was talking about. It had been a genuine mistake. She said, mistake? Hundreds of people losing their life savings, a mistake? I said, so why do you think I'm selling up? She said, well, it wasn't your fault. Why should you suffer? That's what upsets me, Muriel. It's not fair on you. Yes, well, fair on me or not. Didn't stop her buying the corner cupboard. She had her eye on that for years. I suppose Giles has been a scamp. I don't think he's been wicked, just not very bright, that's all. Still, Sloane Street is in Pippa's name, so that's a blessing. And the school fees were covenanted for years ago, so it's not all gloom. I sat under the chestnut tree while the sale was going on. I thought how none of this would have happened if Ralph hadn't died. Then I heard him say, buck up, old girl. Went and gave a hand with the tea. I haven't told Margaret yet. Well, her 14-year-old psychiatrist thinks this may not be the moment. Sees some signs of improvement. Margaret took him some tulips last week. She'd picked them from the hospital flower bed. I apologized, said I could bring them some of our bulbs, but he said, no, not at all. It was a sign she was becoming more outgoing. Wanted to know about Ralph and Margaret. I said, in what way? He said, no particular way. When she was little. I said, Ralph was fond of her. She was his little girl. He said, yes. Took the dogs up the hill later on. They're next, I suppose. Bloody psychiatrist. crack of dawn this morning, I routed out my trusty green cosy and spent a happy half hour breasting the billows. The old cosy's seen better days. Moth has got into the bust. But as the only people around were one or two brave souls walking the dog, I didn't frighten the troops. Came back, hungry as a hunter, boiled myself an egg on the ring, and had it with a slice of rivita sitting in the window. Sun just catches it for an hour then. Lovely. I tidied the room, did one or two jobs, then toddled along to the library, had a walk round Boots. By which time it was getting on for lunchtime. Surprising how time does go. When I think of all the things I used to get through in the old days, wonder how I did it. I've been here about a month now. Got onto it via an advert in the Lady. Sledmere, it's called. Holiday flatlets. Off-season, of course, and quite reasonable. Haven't quite got the town sorted out yet. Feel sure there must be a community somewhere if I could just put my finger on it. I had a word with a young woman at the town hall. Blue fingernails, but civil enough otherwise. She said, was I interested in Meals on Wheels? I said, rather. I was second in command, Meals on Wheels, for the whole of Sudbury. Fun of experience. Brawn not too good, but brains available to be picked at any time. Turns out she meant, did I want to be on the receiving end? I said, not on your life. But message received and understood. The old girls passed it. Hence the swim, I suppose. Still, I soldier on. Not quite orphans of the storm time. I have a look round the shops most days. And if I'm lucky, I run into Angela Gillespie, who's got her mother in a home here and comes over from time to time. We have coffee and a natter about the old days. I can't do that too often. Morning coffee these days seems to cost a king's ransom. And with me, there doesn't have to be coffee. I can talk to anybody. The other morning, I got chatting to one of those young men in orange who bang their tambourines in the precinct. He came up to me rattling his bowl. Shaven head, but sensible enough otherwise. His view is that life is a kind of prep, trial run. Thinks we're being buffed up for a better role next time. Sensible as anything else, I suppose. I said, well, I just hope it's not in Hans Stanton. Oh, the big bright spot on the horizon is Margaret. Heaps better. Lost a lot of weight, got rid of that terrible cardigan, and is now quite a good-looking young woman. In a hostel, up to prayers, but planning on getting a small flat. She came over last week. She said next time it could be under her own steam. Takes her driving test next week. Miracle. She took me out to lunch, just like a normal girl. Talked about Ralph, etc., etc. Doesn't blame him. Wishes he were alive. I don't know what I think. All those years. She paid the bill, left a tip, as if she'd been doing it all her life. Of course, she'll be very nicely off now. Ralph left it all tied up so tight, not even Giles could get his hands on it, rascal. Not seen much of him and Pippa. Not a peep out of them for over a month now. Doesn't like to come down. Says it upsets him. Don't know why, it doesn't upset me. Miss the tinies. Not so tiny. Lucy'll be 12 now. 12 is like 15. Married next. I'd seen myself as a model grandmother, taking them to see Peter Pan, the Science Museum. Not to be. Another dream bites the dust. My big passion now is the telly box. Never bothered with it before. Now, watch it all the time. And I'm not the discerning viewer, no fear. Rubbish, Australian series in the afternoons, everything. Glued to it all. Fan. I sometimes wonder if I killed Ralph, all those death-dealing breakfasts. Haven't had much weather to speak of. Eat less now. Buttered scone goes a long way. This is my new toy. I've seen children with them, never appreciated what they were. Asked a young man for a listen in the precinct. Revelation. Saved up and bought one. I get the cassettes from the library. It's worth its weight in gold. Marvellous. I wouldn't want you to think this was a tragic story. I'm not a tragic woman. Not the type.